Hi everyone, it's Stephanie here and welcome back to the My Favorite Things YouTube channel. In today's video, I'm going to be using the new Our Town die. This is part of the new December 2017 release. And I'm going to use it with the Mini Cloud Edges stencil and the Lots of Hugs stamp set to create a fun rainbow kind of town. I'm going to layer a bunch of these houses together to create a rainbow pattern in the background. This card design is pretty easy and simple to put together, and there are a couple of options with the different design elements. So you can do as I'm doing here and take white cardstock panels and add ink to all of these panels, and that's what I'm going to do all my die cutting from. But if you don't want to take the time to do all of the inking, you can definitely just pick out some colored cardstocks or even pattern papers if you prefer that, and do all of your die cutting from those and then add those to your card design. I chose to use distress inks for mine because I want to do the technique where you apply water to your inked panel to get that distressed water look. I'm sure if you know me, you know that I was probably going to do that. So that's why I prefer to have the distress ink. I just find it gives the overall images a little bit more texture. So what I'm doing is I have a bunch of white cardstock panels that are cut at 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, and I'm taking the various colors of distress inks that I want to use and I'm applying it to the cardstock panels. Now I only need enough area to die cut the strip of houses, so what I'm doing is adding color to each side of the panel, 2 different colors. That way I'm able to die cut the houses from one side, and then once I have it die cut, I can flip it over and die cut it from the other side. So that will give me 2 rows of houses from each of the cardstock panels that I'm adding the ink to. Once I have all of the ink applied to all of the panels, I'm just going to take my paper towel and lay that down onto my work surface, and then that way I can do the distressing with water. So I used to like to just spray the water directly onto my panels, and I found recently that I actually prefer using a paintbrush to do it. I feel like I get a little bit more control over the splatter, and I don't get as much really huge large drops as I was getting when I was spraying it directly from the spray bottle. So what I do is I just open that bottle up and just kind of put my paintbrush right in there to pick up the water onto the bristles, and then I just use my finger to kind of flick that onto the background. That just allows me to kind of start smaller and do kind of a few drops, and then if I need to add more, I definitely can, but you can't take it away once you add it. So I just find this is a little bit more controlled, and I definitely prefer this method. So I just went through and added the water to all of the different panels. So now I have all 4 of my panels, which is 2 colors per each, except for the last one there that just has the purple. And I have a nice rainbow order of color that I can do all of my die cutting from. And the great thing about the Our Town die is it doesn't completely cut along the bottom of the houses. So when you run it through your die cutting machine, all of the houses stay together, and the only area that it die cuts is the area around the houses and the 2 little end pieces. So it is sized to fit nicely across a landscape card like I have here. So all I need to do is line this up along the bottom edge of my panel and then run that through my die cutting machine. Now depending on how much area you want under the houses will depend on how high you kind of position that up on the panel. And you can see here now I've die cut this from the red portion of that panel, and I'm left with this great row of houses with that kind of water splotchy detail on it. And I will pop out all of those windows once I have all of them die cut. So I'm just going to go through now with all of the colored pieces I have here, and I'm going to do the same process and die cut this from all of those pieces. And this is what I'm going to end up with. I have 7 different sets of houses, and all of them are one complete color so that we can kind of layer them together and build a rainbow of houses. So now it's completely up to you how you want to kind of assemble your card. I found it easier to layer all of the houses just one on top of another without kind of bringing in the card base yet. I'm just going to use adhesive on the back of each of the colors and start with the purple one, which is actually going to be my top one. And I'm just going to keep adding the houses on until I have them completely going down in a nice kind of landscape design. And you can see as I layer them, if you go down too far, you're going to kind of have the opening where you're going to see below the other row of houses. And that's because I decided with this design to keep the area underneath of the houses smaller. If you want to be able to layer them farther apart and still have the color showing in between all of the houses, you just want to make sure to add a bit more area underneath the houses before you kind of trim it down. And I will show you at the end of this video another card example with the exact same design, but with the houses spaced farther apart, so you can kind of get an idea of what you prefer, them closer together or farther apart on the overall card. Now I have the houses all together, but I do need to create the background panel. So for my card design, I wanted to have clouds kind of up in the top area of the panel, so that when we layer the houses on top, we actually have a cloudy sky above them. So to do this, I'm just using my Smart Grid paper pad to kind of protect my work surface, and I'm using the mini cloud edges stencil to add some cloud detail to this white panel. This panel was cut from the A2 stitch rectangle STAX set 1 dies. This is the largest from that set. And I'm just using some broken china distress ink and an ink blending tool, and I'm just kind of pulling the color off of the stencil to create the shape of the clouds. So I just kind of go with a light hand and just start on the stencil and pull the color upwards, and that leaves me with this really nice cloud definition on the background. And as I worked, I just kind of kept adding the houses over top to make sure I had the clouds far enough down that when I added the houses, we had cloud detail starting directly above those houses. So now you can see I have everything lined up nicely and I have enough clouds on the panel, so I can go ahead and add the houses to the card panel. Now you can definitely see here this is a bunch of layers, so this does kind of create a bit of a thick card, but I just added adhesive to the entire background of these houses. And once I have it adhered on there, I'm going to take my scissors and just cut the extra around the edges. Now in the card I'm going to show at the end, which is the same design, I actually ran this through my die cutting machine with the A2 stitch rectangle die with all of the houses attached. And it was a little bit difficult. It was pretty thick. It definitely didn't cut all the way through, so I ended up having to use my scissors as well. So you can kind of try either or, but it is quite thick to run through a die cutting machine, so I think I much prefer this method here, where I just used the scissors and left the stitching off of the houses. You don't really see it that much anyway, so I think it's just fine to have the houses as is with the stitch panel underneath. Now for the sentiment, I wanted this to be on a black cardstock panel. Just because we have so much color in the background, I really wanted the white embossed sentiment to stand out on the black cardstock. So I first used my powder embossing bag to kind of cover the surface of the black cardstock, and that just helps to take away any static so that the embossing powder doesn't stick where we don't want it. And now I'm using Versamark ink to stamp the sentiment directly onto this panel. And I just stamped it right along the bottom edge so that once I heat emboss it, I can trim it down into a thin strip. So now I'm just going to add my white embossing powder onto that sentiment. Then I'm just going to take my heat tool and I'm going to heat set that so that the embossing powder is fully set on this piece of cardstock. And then, like I mentioned, I'm just going to trim this down into a thin strip, and now this is going to fit nicely right along the bottom edge of the card. So I'm going to layer it right over the red houses, still leaving a bit of that red showing through at the very bottom of the panel. And then once I have it adhered, I will take my scissors and trim down one of the ends since it was a little bit longer than the cardstock panel. And then for this design, I decided to create my card base the same size as the panel, so it's slightly smaller than an A2 size card base. And here you can see both of the card samples together. We have the one we just created where the houses are closer together, and then we have the one there on the left where I've left a larger area underneath the houses when I trim them down, and that allowed me to layer them farther apart. So it's just completely personal preference. Thank you so much for joining me in today's video. I hope you enjoyed this card creating this fun rainbow scene, and I hope to see you in another video soon. Thanks for watching.